September 23rd, 1889, Kyoto, Japan. A man named Fusajiro Yamauchi would open the very first Hanafuda card shop called Nintendo Kopai. Yamauchi started his business by producing handmade Hanafuda cards, which are a type of Japanese playing card. This was during a time when the Japanese government was banning playing cards to the public due to them being used for gambling, with the exception of Yamauchi's playing cards. Yamauchi would rapidly expand his business and open another card shop in Osaka, about an hour away from the card shop in Kyoto. Many years later, in 1929, Fusajiro Yamauchi gave the company to his son-in-law, Sekiro Kanada. In 1940, Fusajiro Yamauchi would die on New Year's Day from a stroke. 9 years later, in 1949, Fusajiro's great-grandson, Hiroshi Yamauchi, would take over the company. In 1959, Nintendo would change their name to Nintendo Playing Card and make a partnership with Disney to produce cards with their characters on them. In 1963, they would change their name from Nintendo Playing Card to just Nintendo. Over the years, playing cards would lose interest in Japanese households, and Nintendo's market share value would go from 900 yen per share, or about $9, to 60 yen per share, which is about 60 cents. So Nintendo decided to invest in new ideas, like toys, releasing the Nintendo Ultra Hand in 1966, which was a toy that you could grab stuff from far away with. Desperate to find the next big thing, they released packages of instant rice and a taxi service. Eventually, Nintendo would release an electronic toy in 1970 called the Nintendo Beam Gun. In 1972, an American company called Magnavox created the first home console, the Magnavox Odyssey, which Nintendo made an accessory for called the Light Gun. After seeing how successful video games were, Nintendo released their very first console with Mitsubishi. Yes, the car company. Did you also know they made electronics? Anyway, the console was called the Color TV Game 6. They would go on to release the Color TV Game 15, Game Racing 112, TV Game Block Kuzushi, and the Computer TV Game. At the time, Nintendo would make games for arcades as well, which some were later ported to console, like Donkey Kong and Super Mario Bros. In 1980, Nintendo would make their first handheld, called the Nintendo Game & Watch. This console was made to have one game with 2 difficulties and also be used as a watch. The creator of the Game & Watch, Gunpei Yokoi, came up with the idea of the handheld after seeing a man play with his calculator on the train. After this, in 1983, Nintendo would release the Famicom, which would later become the NES in America in 1985. 4 years later, in 1989, Nintendo would release the Game Boy. This was a revolutionary handheld, and it would change some of Nintendo's business for a very long time. In 1990, Nintendo released the successor to the NES, the SNES, but in 1995, Nintendo would release a commercial failure, the Virtual Boy. Only 770,000 units sold compared to the SNES's 20 million. This wasn't so good for Nintendo. A year later, Nintendo would recall the Virtual Boy and release the N64, which would be a success for Nintendo compared to the Virtual Boy. But, compared to its rival, the PlayStation, it only sold 32 million units. Compared to the PlayStation's 102 million units, this was nothing. On top of that, the PlayStation had come out 2 years before, making it even harder to sell. But this wasn't it for Nintendo. The GameCube. Some would say it's Nintendo's best console, having titles like Super Mario Sunshine and Smash Melee. But it still underperformed both the new Xbox and PS2, which sold both respectively 50 million units and 155 million units. But, even though Nintendo was down in the dark, they would go on to release the Wii in 2006, which was marketed as a family console and would outsell both the PS3 and the Xbox 360 by about 20 million units each. Nintendo would try to have success in 2012, but compared to the PS4 and Xbox One, it underperformed by about 130 million units combined. In 2017, Nintendo came out with the Nintendo Switch. So far, the Nintendo Switch has sold 122 million units and counting as of December 2022. After the ups and downs that Nintendo has had over the years, they have still come out on top. Thanks for watching.